Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry P. Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. Also at the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, check out the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, The Larry P. Arnn Show, and more, all at
podcast.hillsdale.edu. Good morning, Glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. This is the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale can be found at hillsdale.edu, and the president of Hillsdale College can be found right there on the split screen if you're watching on the Salem News channel. Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. He and I are going to try something a little bit differently today. We're going to do what is known as a dead roll. We're going to talk for 30 minutes straight rather than try and time our interruptions. And then I'm going to go back and edit in interruptions to see if it makes it easier. Because we're going to talk about the Battle of the Marne today. And, you know, I didn't know anything about the Battle of the Marne, Dr. Arnn, until I began to read Churchill's memoirs, Where We Have Been for a Year, of World War I. And then your fine friend Richard has informed me that the Battle of the Marne is the most edited part of Churchill's World War I memoirs. And he sent me the 1931 one-volume abridged edition of the Battle of the Marne because he viewed it as important. This is a man who knows of which he speaks. How many people are working on the Churchill project up there?
Well, you know, a few since 1962. So it's a big project, long-term thing. The big biography is complete, and we're probably going to do one more document volume of stuff that didn't get in, but it's huge and it's thorough and it's all of that. And about Martin Gilbert used to say, in the writing of 19th and 20th century history, there is no room for the word perhaps. You can look it up. So that's what we do. And Richard's been working on that for, probably not as long as I have because, I was in diapers when I started. But the Battle of Marne it is an important curiosity because the Battle of the Marne is important in a way that is part of the hinge about which Churchill writes his entire world crisis. One of his very best books is about the First World War. It's a long book. It's 5 volumes. And we're in volume 1, by the way. and we've been talking about this since the turn of the century. And but here's what's curious about it. So the Germans, the war is set up by this fact. Ultimately, it's a tragic but understandable decision by the Germans. Germany is in the middle of Europe, and they're surrounded. It's just by definition, right? If you're in the middle, there's stuff all around you. And so what's all around them? On the one hand, France. On the other hand, Russia. They created the German state in the late 19th century by taming Austria. Austria had been also part of their surrounding. And so they look at the world strategically as people who've got 2 fronts to defend, one toward Russia and one toward France. And so in the late 19th century, and the First World War begins in 1914, so it's in place by more than 20 years when the war starts, they conceive a plan to cope with the problem that they've got 2 enemies if it comes to war. And the way to cope is attack one side first and win in a hurry. And in both, by the way, with a different strategic at a certain level plan, they did the same thing in the Second World War. They attacked west first, toward France. And the plan was called the Schlieffen Plan, and that was lightly defend against Russia in the east, but throw everything at France going through Belgium. And if you can imagine the map, I've got one here, I'm looking at it. France is a blob right here, and Germany is sort of here, and Belgium is here. And there is a French-German border, but it's not very long, and it's hilly and wooded. And so the idea is go sweeping across the plains of Belgium, which is a neutral and with which Germany has a treaty, and then go down the coast and then go farther and then encircle Paris, a big fortress, heavily defended with lots of railway communications. And once you've done that, you've broken the French army, and then you can worry about the East. And Hitler's plan was different from that. In fact, within months of the opening of the Second World War, they were planning to do the same thing. And Hitler, who was a fool many occasions, was not here and made him make a new plan, which went down through that narrow part where Germany and France meet.
When Richard sent us the 1931 one-volume edition and the 1933 Sandhurst edition, I did find in it the key phrase, Paris, quote, is not only the heart of France, also the largest fortress in the world, the center of an intricate spider web of railways. Now, I need a little obligatory explanation from you on why having a spider web of railways and internal lines of communication matter so much in a war of this sort.
Well, bullets are heavy and guns are heavier, and men, when they're fighting, eat a lot. So you got to move a lot of heavy stuff around in a hurry. In the Second World War, the German army was pulled mostly by horses. But that's, and we had a superior mechanization to the Germans through most of the Second World War. So the French can move their troops around really well. And if the Germans can take the railways, they can do it too. So the plan was throw everything to this right-hand sweeping movement through Belgium and along the coast of the North Sea, and then encircle France. And they changed the plan in two ways, and that became consequential in two places, not one. The first was Antwerp, because, that's a big port there that they got to go by in Belgium.
And we're coming to that next week. Yep, the Battle of Antwerp.
That's right. And they tarried there, and that has very much to do with Winston Churchill. And that means those troops were not down there toward Paris. And the other was they sent 2 Army Corps to the east because Russia was coming hard in Poland. What's now Poland. It's part of Russia then. And no, it wasn't. It was Poland, but it had forever been a part of Russia. So that meant that they weakened their right, as they say. It's a right-hand circle, strengthen the right. Schlieffen is supposed to have died saying that. It's his last words, strengthen the right. No, they weakened it a bit. And then they get down there to Paris, and they have to go between these huge forts, and they see a big opportunity. The French seen a big, because they have, and see, remember, war is changing very fast. And, because when Marlborough fought along some of these same lands, if you had a big fortress, it was the devil of a thing to take it.
And France, that's what I learned is that Paris is a fortress and Verdun is a fortress. And the Germans, because they weakened their right, I want to quote, to advance upon both sides of Paris, the Germans had not the troops. To enter Paris, they had not at the moment the guns. They must march between Paris and Verdun. And they had not planned that in the Schlieffen plan, correct?
That's right. They were going to go farther and, around the Paris fortresses, and therefore not between Paris and Verdun. And these garrison troops, they had large armies in these series of fortifications. It's not just one big castle. It's entrenchments and large area, lots of people. And what they did was the Germans are in between, and French sally out and attack them in the rear. And they were reinforced. At Antwerp, the British carried the main load along with the Belgian army, which is a little later than this. But remember, the German troops are still up there at Antwerp. They're not down here. And the British, some of them took taxi cabs through Paris to get to the place where the French were making a counterattack.
And when we
They
come
were
back,
behind.
that counterattack, let's go there, in fact. Let's go there after the break, though. Pause right there. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn. Everything Hillsdale is found at hillsdale.edu. Many of you are often, I can't believe it, I do try and answer my mail. How do I get that Hillsdale Dialogue? They are all collected at hughforhillsdale.com. hughforhillsdale.com. If you want to sign up for Imprimis, you go to hillsdale.edu. If you want any of their video courses, you go to hillsdale.edu. If you want all of the Hugh Hewitt, Larry Arnn dialogues, go to hughforhillsdale.com. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn. Stay tuned.
Do you believe in our founders' vision for America? That our republic will only survive if we are an educated and informed people who know our rights and duties. Since 1844, Hillsdale College has sought to educate all who wish to learn about these timeless principles of self-government. For more than 50 years, the college has worked to spread that mission by sending Imprimis to millions of Americans. Imprimis features some of the best speeches given at Hillsdale events, and now an audio version of the popular Speech Digest is available in a new podcast of the same name. And, like the print publication, Imprimis, the podcast, is always free. Listen to the best arguments from speakers such as Chris Rufo, Molly Hemingway, Mark Stein, and Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn, read by Hillsdale students. Subscribe today to listen to Imprimis at podcast.hillsdale.edu. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you get your audio.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. The Marn. If you've been listening to Dr. Larry Arnn and I through these many months that we are doing Volume 1 of World War I's Memoirs by Churchill, you'll know that Richard Langworth has been urging us to use a particular version of Book 1, which we are doing. And Richard was right. The Churchill Project over at hillsdale.edu is something you should not miss. And the extra chapter on the Marne, I greatly appreciate it, Richard, as does Dr. Arnn. Let's go there. Let's go to the counterattack, Dr. Arnn. I want to read what Richard on the Hillsdale Dialogue sent to us from the version, which is his preferred version. It's not in my Bloomsbury book, but it's just elegant. Churchill writes, "Assuredly no human brain had conceived the design, nor had human hand set the pieces on the board. Several separate and discrepant series of events had flowed together. First, the man Gallieni is on the spot. Fixed in his fortress, he could not move towards the battle, so the mighty battle has been made to come to him. Second, the weapon has been placed in his hands, the army of Mannouri. It was given him for one purpose, the defense of Paris. He will use it for another, a decisive maneuver in the field. It was given him against the wish of Joffre. It will prove the means of Joffre's salvation. Third, the opportunity. Kluck, the German, swinging forward in hot pursuit of, as he believed, the routed British and the demoralized French, will present his whole right flank and rear as he passes Paris to Gallieni with Mannouri, the army, in his hand. Observe, not one of these factors would have counted without the other two. All are interdependent, all are here, and all are here now. Gallieni realized the position in a flash. I dare not believe it, he exclaimed. It is too good to be true. But it is true. Confirmation arrives hour by hour. He vibrates with enthusiasm. Instantly on the 3rd, he orders the army of Mannouri to take positions northeast of Paris, which in 48 hours will enable them on the 5th to strike Kluck, and with him the whole advancing line of German armies behind their right shoulder blade. That's beautifully descriptive writing so that even a non-military guy like me understands what happens, and I understand why Richard wanted us to use that version.
Yeah, and see, there's a great book that I had to read in graduate school. I don't remember the author, called The Short War Illusion. And that was Germany's mistake, but also Napoleon's mistake, who had some of the same problems. And, you got too many enemies, and so you're going to beat one of them quick. And what dies at the Marne, and to a lesser extent at Antwerp, is this hope that they could get it over, as remember they had done in the series of wars that created modern Germany, because there they defeated France in weeks. And, signed the treaty that created modern Germany among the French and the Austrians and the Germans and others in the Palace of Versailles. And again, in 1940, they would destroy France in about 6 weeks. And this is what they hoped to do here. By the way, they didn't get their short war in 1940, although the first element was successful in 1940. They didn't get it at all here because they were not able to knock France out of the war quickly. And the counterattack at the Marne is the reason.
And Gallieni is the guy who sees it. I've never heard of his name until I've read this book. He saves the West. There are lots of people I've never stay right there, Dr. Arnn. There are lots of people I've never heard of. That's not to be. It's not going to be a surprise to people. Gallieni is really quite remarkable. And Richard Langworth, thank you. I wouldn't have known about him, but for the fact that you sent us the 1933 edition, I'm not sure. It's all over at hillsdale.edu. Everything is over at hillsdale.edu. All of the prior Hillsdale Dialogues are found at hughforhillsdale.com. That's easy enough, hughforhillsdale.com. But if you want anything at Hillsdale, including an application, or you want to contribute $10, or you want to sign up for Imprimis, which is free, you go to hillsdale.edu, hillsdale.edu. That music means the Hillsdale Dialogue rolls along. All things Hillsdale are at hillsdale.edu. I really wish you would go sign up for Imprimis. They have 7 million subscribers. It's free. It's old-fashioned. It arrives in your mail. It's a speech digest. It's an important address that's given at Hillsdale, and you need to get Imprimis. And it's free. But you got to go to hillsdale.edu in order to get it. I'm talking with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, and we are in our long series on Volume 1 of Churchill's World War I memoir. And the mystery of it is he changed it repeatedly, Dr. Arnn. He kept changing it and changing it and changing it. So that we're using the 1931 and 1933 editions, but it remains a mystery to me as to why Churchill changed it so much.
And see, that partly explains the mystery, because these facts are very important to Churchill. Churchill has, in my opinion, a recorded, clear, strategic, we went over it on the show, grip of how the war is going to unfold, where people are going to be after 15 days and 30 days.
Long before it begins.
And so,
long before it begins.
That's right. Long before it begins. And the British understood a lot. And yet, they didn't quite see, because, Churchill likes to write about this. I had a seminar with some young faculty members and some graduates of the college who were flying back to Hillsdale to study Winston Churchill with me. What an honor. I just love those guys. And they're just like students at Hillsdale College, which they all used to be, except they're older now. And they haven't lost any of their gumption and good. And, one of them's a special forces soldier. One of them's in finance. They're important people. One of them's a professor at Hillsdale College. Well, we were going over Aristotle and Churchill, who write a lot about what practical judgment is like. And it depends on the weight of things, right? The Germans underestimated the weight and force they would need to complete their plan. But the British and the French underestimated the weight and force and consequence of what they actually sent. And so they were routed in Belgium, and they were running for their lives. And they repaired to these forts, and the British came through Paris to help, and the Germans exposed themselves. And that's how they were able to counterattack, and that's how they destroyed the idea, which is the whole strategic point. Like, if you go back to how did the war start, we talked about this. The Archduke is shot. He's the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and he's shot down in Serbia. And the Austrians see an opportunity to bring these stupid Serbians and others in the Austro-Hungarian Empire under better control. And they struggled with that for half a millennium. It's not an exaggeration. And, it lasted for a millennium, that empire. And so they see a chance to do that. And Germany is committed to them. And Germany, once they agree that the Austrians can attack Serbia, they know that that's going to bring Russia into the war, because there are these Slavic, nations down there that are related to the Russians, use a Cyrillic alphabet. They know Russia's going to come, but that means they know how the Germans, are going to attack, and they're going to attack too, right? And that means Belgium and France are attacked because of the decision to let Austria go to war with Serbia. And then that lets loose this whole plan, the Schlieffen Plan, and that plan would have ended the war in the West in a hurry, which was the whole point. So it's in the German General Staff and the Kaiser's noggin when they say, "Okay, Serbia, you can go."
Had they followed
6
the
weeks from
Schlieffen
now,
Plan.
That's right. And the Schlieffen Plan is defeated at the Battle of the Marne. And what we get now here, if you ask the question, why is it forgotten? Well, the horrors of the war and the length of the war. This is happening in early September, middle of September, right? And the war started in August, right? But the war now goes on from this is 1914. It goes on until late 1918. And the vast slaughter of the war and the millions of dead are still to come. And that's why we don't know the name of that French general. And that's why, and I will tell you, it's a puzzle to me. And Martin Gilbert won't let me use the word perhaps. So why would Churchill edit this out as he did, having written about it with the strength that you read earlier? I mean, I'll repeat. One must suppose upon, that's interesting formulation too for a superlative. One must suppose upon the whole that the Marne was the greatest battle ever fought in the world.
Yeah.
And then he can, wow. Yeah. And, it wasn't as big as Verdun, and neither was as big as Stalingrad in the Second World War, the biggest battle ever fought. But here's how he ends it, he says. If in 1917 the French army had succumbed, if the British Navy had not strangled the submarine, the United States had not entered the war, students of today and tomorrow would bend over different history books and different maps. Isn't that a good way to put it?
Yeah.
But never after the Marne had Germany a chance of absolute triumph. So he calls it.
I have the same thing written down, and I paused, and I'm glad Richard sent us this version, because what he emphasizes, I think, that is missing in the Bloomsbury edition, is these almost impossibly risky decisions that have to be made by Gallieni, by Moltke, by Joffre, and by Churchill and the General Staff in the United Kingdom in real time. I mean, it's happening in 24 hours. They're moving millions of men around, and they're deciding the next 100 years, and they're bringing on the Holocaust. They don't know it. They're bringing on the Soviet Union. They do not know it. They're bringing on the Red Chinese. They do not know it. All of this flows from these 48 hours, and it's remarkable.
Yeah, and see, it's true that as a dramatic point, the failure of the Schlieffen Plan was in a way for everybody a tragedy, although the Germans had a plan to reduce France to a kind of subordinate status to Germany forever called the September Program, written in this month that we're talking about. But the war would not have been so costly if this had worked. One can speculate. We're not to do that. Martin Gilbert is stirring right now in his grave. But the reason it's forgotten is that what we all remember about the First World War, what the movie 1917, an excellent movie last year, I think,
yes,
is about those trenches, right? And the trenches were dug as a consequence of this battle. And they didn't exist. The armies were still moving. They were in motion, right? And that meant that when you attacked, you were not attacking prepared positions with artillery and machine guns and barbed wire.
Yeah, they
still
write in
very
here,
formidable.
in Richard's version, quote, "There is hardly any doubt what the German ought to have done. A simple message to all the German armies to be imparted to every division. If you cannot advance, hold on, dig in, and yield not a scrap of conquered territory. Vestigia nulla retrosum might well have stabilized the situation. At this time, however, only the British Army knew, from the Boer War, the power of modern weapons on the defensive. The French were just enjoying their first exultant experience of it. None of the military men on the other side yet knew that, as a matter of fact, a 30-mile gap in front of 200 is only a trap for the attackers who enter into it." You've stressed this time and time again. Churchill, because he was at Khartoum, knew if you attack it in an entrenched position, you're dead.
Yeah. You see, the Civil War, oddly enough, Churchill would later see that same thing unfolding in the American Civil War. Because every time either army, North or South, attacked uphill against a prepared position, it lost. And at Gettysburg, that's what happened. Longstreet, who was probably, in my opinion, the greatest general on the Southern side in the Civil War, Longstreet wanted, when he saw how the armies were disposed, they arrived at Gettysburg. The Southern Army was coming from the north, and the Northern Army was coming from the south on this town in Pennsylvania. And so they fought the first day, and people were getting entrenched, the north on a series of hills, because this is the Southern Army, get over here, Southern Army coming down and the Northern Army going up, and they fought for a day, and then they sort of wheeled, and the Northern Army is on some hills, some of them formidable at the south end, and the Southern Army is on gentler hills to the west. So what Longstreet wanted to do was disengage and go around and go find another big old hill between the Northern Army and Washington, D.C., and entrench on it and wait for them, because they wouldn't have any choice but to attack. And then we'd beat them. And that's what he said to Lee. And Lee wouldn't do it. One of my Professor Jaffa, he's a Lincoln man, he said, well, the weakness of Lee was he just really liked to fight.
Yeah.
The enemy is there. We're going to go get him.
That is not always the best strategery. As Churchill explains at length, in World War I, it was the worst strategery. Dig in and get your Gatling gun, your Maxim gun. And he had learned that in the Sudan, as Dr. Arnn and I talked about earlier on a Hillsdale Dialogue. All the Hillsdale Dialogues, all of them, there are 850 of them, Hugh4Hillsdale.com. Go get smart. Go put that on your podcast listening and start at the beginning.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Welcome back, America. We play the same music for the Hillsdale Dialogue each week. I have no idea what that is, but that's my favorite bit of music for the Hillsdale Dialogue. I don't know that Adam knows what it is, but it always marks the Hillsdale Dialogue. We use classical music with each of the segments on the Hillsdale Dialogue to remind you we're talking about big things, important things, things that matter, things that last. And there's just so much we don't know, and we are running out of time to learn it. And it's very important that we learn the lessons of World War I before we stumble into World War IV. And we're headed that way. And that has been much on my mind as I've read Volume 1. Dr. Arnn, I keep thinking about China. I keep thinking about Ukraine. Mostly I keep thinking about Israel. And you know what this book has taught me, Dr. Arnn, especially at this time? I read last week about Israel, and I listened to a podcast about Gaza. Gaza was described as the greatest urban fortress in the history of warfare. That they have spent 17 years, Hamas, building a fortress for terrorism, guerrilla, urban warfare. And the Israeli Defense Forces face another one in southern Lebanon. And we understand, by virtue of what happened in World War I, how costly it will be if the IDF moves quickly, directly against the tunnels of Gaza. They have to be methodical or they'll get ripped up this way. This is the lesson of World War I.
You know, people, it's good to understand how dangerous it is right now. There's a war in Israel. There's a war in Ukraine. And maybe there's going to be a war in Taiwan. And you just can't read about the national security situation with reading about the fact that we are running out of bullets. I mean, missiles in particular, but all kinds of weapons, right? And we have our industrial base is internationalized. Somebody told me the other day that we have superiority in submarines and we have a budget to make 3 a year. More generally, by the way, the Chinese Navy is bigger than ours now, and they're making 140 ships a year, and we have a budget for 7.5 a year, right? And for 10 years, that's our 10-year plan, 75 ships. Now, we have a budget for 3 submarines a year, but we need parts from China, and they give us enough parts for 1.5. Now, you got kids in the military, right?
Yes.
And they're not getting the bullets. And so it's, I think, first of all, if you study war, and especially if you study Winston Churchill in war, if it doesn't teach you caution, you're not reading carefully. Right?
And that's why we're going to stay on this next week. When we read about Antwerp, though, and we're going to read about why generalship matters, why leadership matters. That concludes this week, though, of the Hillsdale Dialogue. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. I do think we owe Richard a thank you because he brought us a better edition, Dr. Arnn. My hat is off to him. It's almost, I do not understand. And you have no recollection of asking Dr. Gilbert why he made these edits?
No, it's a mystery, and to me anyway. And was it to Gilbert? I don't know. I guess I could go look.
If you miss part of this, it will be posted over at hillsdale.edu. If you want to go right to it, Hillsdale has a separate page for HughForHillsdale.com. HUGHFOR Hillsdale.com. HughForHillsdale.com. I tell you that because then you can go find them in reverse order of their appearing. They're also over at iTunes. If you go to Hugh Hewitt Hillsdale iTunes, you can find it there as well. And some people prefer that because it's easier to start at the beginning and go backwards. But if you want to start at the end and go backwards, then, did I say that wrong? I did say that wrong. If you want to start at the beginning and go forwards, you go to iTunes, Hugh Hewitt Hillsdale. If you want to start at the end because you've been a faithful listener and you just missed a couple of weeks, then you go to HughForHillsdale.com. HughForHillsdale.com will also tell you all the many ways that you can help out Hillsdale. And let me just tell you, if you're feeling despair, if you're feeling worried about the country, Hillsdale is the remedy that you need. Get involved, support them. Small checks, big checks, every kind of check in between. Get Imprimis, give it to your friends, and send your children to the website to at least take a look. They'll love Hillsdale if they go. I have never met an unhappy Hillsdale graduate. Never, not once. Hillsdale.edu.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.